Okay. Have you ever felt like, you're kind of stuck with these emotional patterns
Yeah.
that just won't quit?
Yeah, absolutely.
Like that feeling of not being good enough
Hmm.
or always needing to please everyone? Well, today we're diving into this book that claims we can actually erase these really deep-rooted emotional learnings
Wow.
and not just managing them, but actually like getting rid of them.
That's right. And what's really, really interesting is that we're going straight to the source.
Okay.
The emotional memories themselves. These memories shape our reactions and how we see the world, almost like an invisible script that we're following.
Oh, that's interesting. So we're not just talking about like positive self-talk here.
Right.
We're talking about like rewiring those deep down beliefs that are driving our actions.
Yeah.
Even if we don't realize it.
Exactly. And the book that's going to guide us on this journey is Unlocking the Emotional Brain. It's written by Bruce Ecker, Robin Tishik, and Laurel Hulley, a team of therapists and researchers who've been pioneers in this field.
And what I found really interesting is they present a very practical, almost theory-free approach.
Mm-hmm.
It's all about how our brains actually work based on solid neuroscience.
Right. It's not about abstract theories, but about understanding the mechanics of how those emotional memories get locked in, and more importantly, how we can unlock them.
Yeah, I think we've all experienced this, that embarrassing moment from years ago that still makes you cringe.
Oh, yeah.
Or that fear of public speaking that just won't go away.
Yeah.
Like these emotional memories have a life of their own.
And so often we try to cope with them through therapy or self-help techniques.
Yeah.
But what if, instead of just managing them, we could actually change the underlying neural pathways?
Oh.
That's where the concept of memory reconsolidation comes in.
Now, this is where things get really cool. Memory reconsolidation. It's like hitting the reset button on those old emotional learnings. It's based on the discovery that memories aren't fixed. They can actually become temporarily unlocked at the synaptic level.
And when they're unlocked, they're vulnerable to change. That's the key.
Wow.
Researchers have even identified a 3-step process for actually erasing these emotional learnings.
Okay, I'm all ears. What are the steps?
So first, we need to reactivate the specific emotional memory that we want to target. Bring it to the surface, make it vivid.
So really feel it and experience it again.
Yes, but with a twist. The second step is to introduce what's called a mismatch experience.
Okay.
This is a new experience that directly contradicts the old learning.
Right.
Think of it as presenting your brain with evidence that challenges that old ingrained belief.
So if my old belief is I'm not good enough,
right,
the mismatch experience would be a situation where I actually excel at something and really let myself feel that sense of accomplishment.
Exactly. You're getting it. And the third step is repetition.
Okay.
The more we repeat this mismatch experience, the stronger that new learning becomes, essentially overwriting the old one in our brains.
So it's like creating a new neural pathway that eventually becomes stronger than the old one. Mm-hmm. It's like paving a new road that bypasses the old bumpy road.
That's a great analogy. And this is where the book's focus on coherence therapy comes in.
Okay.
This is a specific method developed by Ecker and Hulley, which incorporates these principles of memory reconsolidation into a therapeutic approach.
So it blends the depth and intimacy of traditional talk therapy with this cutting-edge brain science.
It is.
That sounds fascinating.
And what I find particularly interesting is the way coherence therapy uses what they call juxtaposition experiences. This involves putting that old problematic emotional learning side by side with a powerful contradictory experience. Yeah. And it's this clash, this mismatch that sparks that lasting change.
It's like holding up two completely opposite beliefs next to each other.
Right.
And letting your brain decide which one makes more sense.
Right. And the book is full of case studies showing how effective this can be.
Okay.
For example, there's the story of Richard, who was absolutely crippled by self-doubt, especially at work.
Mm-hmm. He
could never bring himself to express his ideas with any confidence.
So how did they apply this memory reconsolidation process to Richard's situation?
Well, through therapy, they discovered that Richard's self-doubt stemmed from a deep-seated belief that any show of confidence would make him just like his father, who was domineering and whom he hated.
So it's like his brain was stuck in this loop.
Right.
If I'm confident, I'll become my father, which terrified him.
Exactly. He was unconsciously sabotaging himself to avoid that outcome.
What?
But then a pivotal moment happened during a work meeting.
Okay.
Richard saw his colleagues confidently sharing their ideas, and guess what?
Oh.
They weren't hated or rejected for speaking up.
I see where this is going.
Yeah.
That was his mismatch experience.
Yes.
He saw that confidence doesn't automatically lead to being a jerk like his dad.
You got it. And by repeatedly bringing this new experience to mind, that he can be confident without turning into his father, Richard began to break free from that old pattern. His self-doubt started to melt away.
Wow. That's such a powerful example. Mm-hmm. So what you're saying is we all might have these hidden rules in our brains based on past experiences.
Yeah.
And those rules might be holding us back without us even realizing it.
That's exactly right. But here's the thing. It's not just about early childhood experiences or attachment patterns, though those can certainly play a role.
Right. The book talks about how other life experiences can also shape these deep-seated beliefs, right?
Yes.
like dealing with a serious illness,
Yeah.
financial struggles, or even facing our own mortality.
And even something like our individual temperament, how sensitive we are, how we react to stress. Those innate differences can contribute to these patterns.
So it sounds like this coherence therapy and this whole memory reconsolidation process could be applied to a wide range of issues, not just those stemming from childhood.
That's right. It's a versatile tool for addressing all sorts of deeply ingrained emotional learnings.
Yeah.
Regardless of where they originated.
It's amazing to think that we don't have to be, held hostage by these old emotional learnings, that we can actually rewrite those old scripts.
Exactly. And that brings us to a really crucial concept from the book, emotional coherence.
Okay.
The idea that our symptoms, even those that seem completely irrational or self-destructive, actually make perfect sense when we understand that underlying emotional learning.
So even behaviors that seem to be causing us problems, in the present, were likely developed as a way to cope with difficult situations in the past.
Right. It's like our brain is saying, this is what worked back then, so this is what we need to keep doing now.
Yeah.
Even if it's no longer helpful.
It's like wearing a heavy winter coat in the middle of summer.
Yeah.
You needed it once, but now it's just weighing you down.
That's a great way to put it. And this is why simply trying to suppress symptoms or change our thoughts through willpower alone isn't always effective.
Right.
We need to address that deeper emotional learning that's driving them.
So it's not about just putting a Band-Aid on the symptom. It's about going deep and figuring out the root cause. That makes a lot of sense.
It does. And I think this concept of emotional coherence can be really, really empowering. Instead of judging ourselves for our reactions, we can start to understand the why behind them.
Right. Instead of thinking, why am I so anxious all the time?
Right.
We can ask, what is this anxiety trying to protect me from? What is it trying to tell me?
Exactly. It's about approaching our emotions with curiosity and compassion rather than judgment. And in doing so, we can start to unravel that underlying coherence and create lasting change. Now, I'm really curious about this idea of terms of attachment that the book talks about. Can you explain a bit more about what that means?
Sure. Think of terms of attachment as the set of rules that we learn about connection and love.
Okay.
From our earliest relationships, especially with our primary caregivers.
So it's like the blueprint we develop for how relationships work based on those early experiences.
Exactly. And these terms become deeply ingrained in our emotional brain. They shape how we approach relationships throughout our lives.
Right.
They influence how we seek love, how we express our needs, how we respond to conflict, all of it.
And I imagine for many people, those learned rules might be outdated or even harmful. For instance, someone who grew up with emotionally distant parents might develop a term of attachment that says, it's not safe to express my needs or be vulnerable, right? Which could lead them to avoid intimacy or struggle to truly connect with others in a meaningful way.
Yeah.
They might keep people at a distance, afraid of getting hurt.
It's like they're still operating under those old rules, even though the situation has changed. They're no longer that helpless child.
Exactly. And that's where therapy can be so valuable.
Right.
It can help us identify these terms of attachment, understand how they're impacting our lives, and ultimately, update them to create healthier, more fulfilling relationships.
So it's about recognizing those patterns, challenging them, and ultimately choosing to rewrite them. That's pretty empowering.
It is. And while the authors highlight the significance of attachment patterns, they also emphasize that there are many paths to healing and transformation.
Okay.
They don't present coherence therapy as the only solution.
That's good to hear.
Yeah.
Because I know there are so many different approaches to therapy out there.
Right. And unlocking the emotional brain actually illustrates how this process of memory reconsolidation can be integrated into various therapeutic approaches.
Okay.
They give examples from, modalities like AEDP, EFT, EMDR, and even internal family systems therapy.
So there's like a universal principle that can be applied in different ways, depending on the individual and the therapist's approach.
Precisely. And in each example, you can see those same core principles at work.
Right.
Reactivating the old learning, introducing a mismatch experience, and then reinforcing that new learning through repetition. It's like there's this common language of emotional change that transcends specific techniques or theories.
That's really fascinating. It makes this whole concept feel even more accessible and applicable to a wide range of people and situations.
It does. And I think that's what makes this book so valuable. It provides a framework for understanding how lasting change actually happens in the brain.
Right.
It offers hope that even the most deeply rooted patterns can be shifted.
I'm with you on that. It's definitely given me a lot to think about. What stood out to you the most from our deep dive into unlocking the emotional brain? What really resonated with you?
For me, it's the emphasis on empowering the client. It's not about the therapist being the expert with all the answers or dictating the path to healing. It's about creating a safe space for clients to tap into their own innate capacity for change.
I love that too. It's like we all have this incredible power within us to rewrite our emotional scripts. And coherence therapy or any approach that utilizes memory reconsolidation simply provides the tools and guidance to access that power.
Exactly. It's about fostering self-discovery and creating a collaborative partnership between the therapist and the client.
And it's about embracing the richness and complexity of human experience, recognizing that there's no one-size-fits-all approach to healing. Each person's journey is unique,
Absolutely. And speaking of empowerment, one thing that really struck me in the book is how these deeply ingrained emotional patterns can often be transformed in a surprisingly short amount of time.
Really, I have to admit, when I think about, traditional therapy,
Right.
I often think about years of sitting on a couch
Yeah.
trying to unravel all those knots. But you're saying that's not always the case
Right.
with this approach.
That's right. And that's what's so revolutionary about the therapeutic reconsolidation process.
Okay.
It's not about spending years and years digging through the past.
Right.
It's about identifying the core emotional learning and targeting it directly.
Okay.
And when that learning is erased, the symptoms often vanish as well.
So it's more about precision and efficiency,
Yeah.
finding the exact right lever to create a shift
Yes.
rather than a long, drawn-out process.
Exactly. It's like finding the right key to unlock a door that's been jammed shut for years.
Yeah.
And the book has some amazing examples of this, like the story of John, who was completely consumed by guilt after his daughter lost her leg due to meningitis.
Oh, wow. I can't even imagine the pain and guilt he must have felt.
Right.
It's heartbreaking.
His guilt was so intense that it drove him into isolation and depression.
Yeah.
He couldn't function.
So how did they use coherence therapy to help him?
Well, through therapy, they discovered that John's guilt was fueled by a deep-seated belief that if you do things right, bad things don't happen.
Right.
It was this rigid belief, likely formed in childhood, that made it impossible for him to accept the randomness and unfairness of what had happened to his daughter.
So his guilt was almost a way to try to maintain a sense of control of a situation that felt completely out of control.
Yes.
If he could just blame himself, maybe he could prevent something like that from ever happening again.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It was a tragic but understandable coping mechanism. And by bringing that belief to the surface and challenging it with contradictory evidence that even when we do our best, bad things can still happen,
Right.
John was finally able to release the guilt.
Wow.
He could grieve the loss of his daughter's leg without that added burden of self-blame.
It's incredible to think that such a deeply ingrained belief could be shifted so profoundly.
It is, and there's another story in the book that really stood out to me, the story of Cliff, a man who had been struggling with alcohol addiction for years.
Okay.
He'd been through countless treatment programs, but nothing seemed to stick.
So what was different about coherence therapy for him?
Well, through this approach, they discovered that Cliff's drinking was tied to a deep-seated fear of emotional vulnerability.
Okay.
As a child, he learned to suppress his feelings, to avoid conflict and maintain a sense of peace in his chaotic family.
So he never learned how to deal with difficult emotions in a healthy way.
Right.
Alcohol became his way of numbing out.
Exactly. And it wasn't until he was able to access and process those buried emotions that he was finally able to break free from the grip of alcohol.
Right.
He had to learn new ways to cope, new ways to relate to his own feelings.
These stories are so powerful. They really highlight the potential of this approach to address a wide range of issues, not just, specific phobias or anxieties.
I agree. And one thing that I find particularly encouraging is that coherence therapy doesn't try to fit people into neat little diagnostic boxes.
Yeah.
Or follow rigid protocols.
Yeah.
It's a truly individualized approach that honors the unique experiences and needs of each person. It's about understanding their story, their unique emotional landscape.
It's like each person has their own unique puzzle, and this approach helps them find the missing pieces.
That's a great way to put it. And it's about recognizing that healing isn't a linear process.
Right.
There will be ups and downs, setbacks and breakthroughs.
Of course.
But the key is to keep moving forward, keep exploring, keep learning.
Well, as we wrap up this deep dive into unlocking the emotional brain, I have to say I'm feeling a sense of hope and possibility. It's like we're at the beginning of a whole new chapter in understanding how we can heal and grow.
I couldn't agree more. And for our listener, I hope this deep dive has sparked some curiosity about your own emotional patterns.
Yeah.
Maybe some questions about those ingrained beliefs that might be holding you back, those old scripts you might be ready to rewrite.
And maybe, just maybe, this is the beginning of your own journey of unlocking your emotional brain and stepping into a more fulfilling and authentic life.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Until next time.